Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Andrabi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try to analyze the stringent provisions of Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967 in the backdrop of the recent SI Andrabi judgment of 2025. Then in the second topic, we'll try to provide an in-depth analysis of India and European Union relations and its ties in the backdrop of our Honorable Prime Minister's recent visit to Italy and the Melody deal which has been cracked. Then, from a prelims pointer, we'll take up 5 news, where we'll not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026, which is around the corner. Thus, stay tuned. The apex court of the country, the Supreme Court, has reversed its earlier stand taken on the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967 in the Gurvinder Singh judgment of 2024 by upholding the right to personal liberty of an accused person who is being charged under the Act, specifically under the Article 21, which provides for right to dignified life, in a recent judgment, that is SI Andrabi judgment of 2025. The issue which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of government policies and its intervention. So what is the backdrop of this Gurvinder Singh judgment or SI Andrabi judgment? We'll try to assess that. Let's first try to understand the provisions of Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967. So from your polity classes, you guys can recall about the Article 19 of the Constitution. The Article 19, which basically provides for 6 fundamental freedoms to you. One of such very important fundamental freedom is Article 19, freedom of speech and expression. Keep this in mind that these 6 fundamental freedoms are available only to the citizen of the country and not to any foreigner. So when we are saying freedom of speech and expression, it basically implies 2 things. One, you people have the freedom of speech to basically sensitize the masses about any kind of issue which you people are getting affected from, or to actually raise your grievances against the state, as well as you also have the right to protest against any act of the government. But keep this in mind that within the fundamental law of the land, that is Constitution itself, there are certain implicit limitations which are imposed on the freedom of speech and expression. First is that any such speech shall not be provocative in the nature to actually disrupt the public order, as well as you should not use this speech, use this freedom to actually kind of incite the masses to actually commit any kind of public offense. Thus, to actually curtail any such unsolicited speech of expression and acts, the government basically enacted the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967 to basically curtail down those kind of speeches and acts which act detrimental to the larger idea of national security, integrity and sovereignty of the country. The specific context of the passing of Unlawful Activity Prevention Act in the year of 1967, there were 2 specific reasons. First was the rising insurgency in the region of northeastern states, where various such organizations were actually demanding for regional autonomy or basically secession of that region from the larger union. The second was the Naxalbari uprising of 1967, where some peasants in the region of West Bengal, led by communist leaders like, for example, Charu Mazumdar, Kanu Sanyal, the communist leaders who themselves were inspired by the Mao Zedong's philosophy. Mao Zedong, who was the first premier of China, who gave the 5-finger strategy which we were discussing in the recent lecture. So, inspired by Mao Zedong, these communist leaders, they basically provoked the peasants to take up arms and throw the state machinery through violent act and means, which basically form the part of the rise of left-wing extremism in our country. And thus, in that backdrop, the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967 was enacted by the then government of India. So let's try to understand what basically constitutes an unlawful activity. The Act itself says that any action of either a single individual or an association which intends to bring cession or secession of Indian territory. So let's say, for example, there is a person or there is an organization which is basically inciting certain people in a specific region to basically secede from the larger union. and thus they are basically disclaiming or questioning our country's sovereignty and integrity. Or if any such individual or association is basically causing the disruption of the harmony or public order. Now let's ponder upon a question. Does there exist any uniform legal definition of what constitutes public order? The answer is nahi. So you guys can understand and can basically kind of derive from this that if there does not exist any uniform or legal definition of what constitutes public order or what basically constitutes the integrity of the nation, don't you think that such prevailing ambiguity in the provisions of the law itself basically opens up a Pandora box for the government, where the government can basically take various discriminatory and discretionary action to actually curtail any kind of speech, any kind of action, by terming it to be the disruptive of the India's national security, public order, integrity of the nation. Correct? So one issue, one biggest critique of this act is this ambiguity which lies within the provisions of the law, where various such terms like public order, national integrity has not been legally defined. Then with an 2004 amendment which was brought to the act, it also ended up including for the first time the term terrorism in the provisions of the act. Keep this in mind that under section 3 of the act, only central government can declare any association as an unlawful one. And these stringent provision of this act is applicable equivalently to any citizen as well as a foreign national. To understand that, you guys might be aware about a person called as David Headley. David Headley was an American citizen but of Pakistani origin, right? So he basically entered into our country as a tourist and thus started making vlogs documenting various places of the city of Mumbai and started sending all of this documented information to an organization based in Pakistan, a terrorist organization that was Lashkar-e-Toiba, thus masterminding the 26/11 attack which took place and shook the conscience of the nation. So can such foreign nationals like for example David Headley, if the Indian agencies end up proving his direct linkage to 26/11 attack, can they be charged under this Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967 as well? The answer is absolutely yes. Also, such organizations which are foreign based but they are basically propagating terrorism in our country on our Indian soil to basically disrupt the public order, they can also be declared as unlawful under the provision of this act, like for example Lashkar-e-Toiba. So the first schedule of the act basically contains the list of such banned organizations like for example CPI-ML, SIMI, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, etc. Then with the 2013 amendment, the second amendment brought to the act, it ended up also including the money laundering as one of the offenses. What was the backdrop of this? The backdrop was the Financial Action Task Force, which is very important for your prelims examination as well. So India in the year of 2010 ended up becoming the 34th member of Financial Action Task Force. Keep this in mind that currently Financial Action Task Force has approximately 40 members. 38 of them are nations like for example India. 2 of them are regional organizations like for example European Commission and your Gulf Cooperation Council. So this Financial Action Task Force is basically an intergovernmental body which has been established by the Group of 7, the G7 developed economies in the year of 1989 with 2 important objectives. First is to curb down the money laundering which takes place and the Hawala channels. And the 2001 mandate specifically given to the Financial Action Task Force by these G7 countries was to curb down the illicit use of such channels to fund terrorist activity. Now let's try to understand this, how this Financial Action Task Force works. So let's say for example, from the country of Pakistan, hypothetically obviously, there has been some transfer of black money which has taken place to a country that is Myanmar. Now you guys can recall that how Myanmar basically forms the part of Golden Triangle, which is infamous for drug trafficking. The Golden Triangle which basically consists of countries like Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, LMT. So there was a black money which was transferred to the country of Myanmar. And using this black money, there was some sale or purchase of such drug which was taken on the border of India, which we share with Myanmar, thanks to the government of India Act 1935. And thus, this illicit money was actually utilized to fund terrorist activities on Indian soil. So, if we end up proving, right, this Hawala channel which existed and tracing its route back to Pakistan, and we can prove that the authorities in the Pakistan were completely aware about such illicit transfer which was taking place of the black money to basically fund the terrorist activities on Indian soil, then this grouping of Financial Action Task Force, the country which forms the part of it, they will basically apply certain economic sanctions on Pakistan. Thus, let's say for example, for Pakistan to import oil, it will be required to pay more dollar, or in various trade agreements, the tariff imposition which will be on the higher side. So that will basically end up, kind of curbing the economic development of Pakistan. And thus Pakistan will not fund such illicit transfer of money to fund terrorist activities on Indian soil. That is the idea. Thus, there are several lists which exist. The most prominent one is the blacklist. The blacklisted countries are those countries with serious strategic deficiencies in countering money laundering and terrorist financing. Currently, it includes 3 countries, that is your Iran, Myanmar, and your North Korea. So remember these facts. So as we had become the member of the Financial Action Task Force in the year of 2010, in 2013 we brought this amendment, including the money laundering as one of the offences. So under the UAPA itself, now there can take place the prosecution of any individual or organization which are also involved in money laundering, and to establish their links with any kind of terrorist groupings or act. And any such organization, let's say for example an NGO also who is working in our country, and if we end up proving that yes, this particular organization was kind of indulging in black money, hawala channels, and ultimately transferring this money to various kind of sleeper cells which exist in our country, then we can basically end up banning that organization. And that can take place for a minimum period of 5 years. After 5 years, there will be a committee which will be set up, headed by a high court judge, who will eventually decide that whether such ban shall be lifted or not. Also, let's try to understand about the various investigation and the enforcement perspectives, as well as the arrest and the bail provisions, which basically forms the center of the debate for our lecture today. First is investigation and enforcement. So from section 43 clause A to 43 clause F, it basically ends up giving a special power to the National Investigation Agency and the state police for kind of investigating such cases and kind of filing the charge sheet. Keep this in mind that National Investigation Agency is a statutory body which was created under the National Investigation Agency Act of 2008 in the backdrop of 26/11 attack which we were discussing. Also, let's say for example there is a Central Bureau of Investigation. So if CBI want to, let's say, investigate a case, being a central agency, if it wants to investigate a particular case in the state government, it requires the due permission of that state government. Does such permission on the same level is also required for NIA? The answer is no. NIA can take over the case even without the state government consent after the post 2008 amendment. Then, if there is any individual who was involved in any of such activity, which was basically acting detrimental to the larger idea of nation security, under section 25 of the Act, the property of the accused can be entirely seized. Coming to the arrest and the bail provision. So let's first try to understand what happens in the normal case. So let's say for example, under the Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Samhita of 2023, there is a person who has been accused, keep this in mind, not convicted by the court but accused of committing a crime. Then for the police who has arrested this accused, they have 1 day of time to complete the investigation, to prove that yes, indeed this particular person itself has committed this crime, and thus file a charge sheet. If the police is unable to complete their investigation and file the charge sheet within 1 day, then the judicial magistrate has the power to basically provide 15 days of police custody for the accused. Keep this in mind. This 15 days is the maximum time period. So basically, now the accused will be sent for the police custody. Under the police custody, the police will basically ask certain question to that person, will try to collect more evidences, and thus try to establish the linkage of this accused person with the crime which has been committed, and then ultimately file the charge sheet. However, the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967 basically nullify all of these provisions. So if you have been accused that you were either involved in money laundering, or you were involved in any activity which can be termed as a terrorist activity, or if you are charged for disrupting the public order under UAPA 1967, then the NIA can basically detain a person for 180 days, approximately 6 months, without filing any charge sheet at all. Then, under section 43D clause 5, the bail is denied even if prima case exists. So in the normal circumstances, the kind of the epithet which the court follows is bail is the rule and jail is the exception, because the court believes in the inherent innocence of the accused person, that you might be an innocent person, you might be being framed by either police or let's say some other people. However, in the case of UAPA, the jail becomes the rule and the bail becomes the exception. So even if there is a suspicion on you that yes, you were involved in such activity by the NIA, even in that case, the bail will be denied, even if such prima facie case exists. Thus, the courts have very limited power to grant such bail. The penalty is also of the highest nature, that is capital punishment or life imprisonment. And then a tribunal will be created under the section 5, which will be headed by the High Court to actually, kind of review the ban on any organization which has taken place within the 6 months. Also, there were certain amendments which were brought to the Act by the 2019 amendment. So, under the Act, the central government may designate an organization as a terrorist organization if it commits or participates in act of terrorism, if it promotes terrorism. The bill additionally empowers the government to designate the individuals as terrorists as well. Also, under the Act, investigating officer must obtain prior approval of DGP to seize the property that was connected with terrorism. However, under the amendment which has taken place, investigation of cases may be conducted by the officer of the rank of DSP or ACP or above. Even the officers of NIA who are the rank of the inspector of above, they can start the investigation of the cases, right? Thus actually to, kind of file the charge sheet in the much expeditious manner. So what are the various critique which actually surround this act, and that's why it keeps on appearing in the news? The first issue is something which people have already understood, and that is the ambiguity in the law. For example, the act basically defines a terrorist activity which undermines, listen very carefully, the national security or the economic security of the country. Both the terms are entirely vague, entirely ambiguous in the nature under section 15 and does not define. So let's say, for example, you people are nothing but the aware citizen of the country, I hope. And you people are basically trying to exercise your freedom of speech and expression which has been guaranteed to you under Article 19 of the Constitution. And you are trying to raise your voice against the paper leak which is taking place, right? Which basically shows the lack of accountability on the behalf of the government, which is basically compromising the future of the demographic dividend of the country. And thus you people are basically protesting on the national highway. Why you chose national highway? Because you actually wanted to disseminate your grievances to the larger nation. And thus if you are blocking a national highway, obviously the logistic is going to get disrupted, and thus media attention will be drawn towards your movement. However, the government says that this national highway is basically kind of imperative for the logistic and thus economic security of the country. Keep this in mind. And if you are compromising or jeopardizing the economic security of the country, you are basically committing what? A terrorist activity. And thus you can be charged under the UAPA 1967. Thus, don't you think that these broad and overarching provisions of the Act can actually also end up crippling the voice of reason? Keep this in mind that under the provisions of the Act, it is not even required for you to be present on that highway to actually block that highway. Even let's say, for example, if you have given this idea on Twitter, you have not committed the act itself. Even in that case, the government can actually do the preemptive arrest and detention. Do you understand this? It's just another form of a preventive detention. Also, it basically acts as antithetical to the ordinary criminal laws itself. Why? Because of the higher bar which has been kept for granting the bail. Just look at the headings here. Court pulls up the police for slow investigation in UAPA case. Or for example, how the half of UAPA investigations are pending for over 3 years. So if it is pending for over 3 years, if let's say for example such committee of high court judges are being framed and they kept on telling you that yes indeed more substance is required, more investigation is required, then your arrest can be as prolonged as more than 3 years as well. And that is exactly what happened with the G Chakrabarti case, where G Chakrabarti, who was basically accused of, kind of indulging in such money laundering or indulging in such terrorist activity or trying to jeopardize the public order and national security, was basically being an accused, not convicted by the court, was actually jailed for 7 years. Imagine a person losing 7 years of the most formative phase of his life just spending in the jail, making him entirely economically obsolete and kind of financially bankrupt. So don't you think that the entire human rights which we read in our constitution, like article 21, article 14 of G Chakrabarti, that was completely violated under the provisions of the act? Just look at the data which has been provided to us. So keep this in mind when it comes to UAPA. We have NCRB data, National Crime Record Bureau data, but that is available only till the year of 2022. So it shows the share of UAPA cases between 2019 and 22. Just see the rising number of UAPA cases. Then just look at the number of the persons who are arrested under the UAPA, more than 11,500 in the span of 5 years. However, just look at the rate of conviction. Up to 6% people are actually eventually convicted in a UAPA case. 94% of them, 94% of the trials actually result in what? Acquittal or discharges. So basically these people were honest, these people were innocent, yet they were basically charged in the jail for years thanks to the kind of a prolonged investigation which was being committed by the NIA and the state police. So don't you think that basically amounts to what? Their entire violation of the human rights. Thus, in this case, there has been several lines of judgment which has been taken by the Supreme Court. We'll try to understand them one by one. The first is the Balchand case. In Balchand case, in the year of 1978, right, this is just after the period of emergency, if you people keep this in mind. So the Supreme Court was basically in the judicial activist mode. It basically says bail is the rule, jail is the exception. So let's say for example NIA is trying to prove that yes indeed this person David Hadley, when he was clicking these pictures, he was basically trying to map the city of Mumbai for the terrorist activity of Lashkar-e-Toiba. But we cannot directly establish it. We do not have enough evidences for that, enough proofs for that. So in that case, what will happen? Bail is the rule. Then in the Union of India versus K. Najib case, the Supreme Court held that the bail under UAPA is an exception, but it shall be balanced by speedy trial, which shall be conducted. So the faster adjudication court can take place. The investigation of the procedure of that can itself be expeditious in the nature. In V. Gonzalez case 2023, the Supreme Court held that the surface analysis of probative values of accused plea is necessary. If the accused is basically, kind of submitting a plea to the court on the grounds of, let's say, his health is being deteriorating or his family is in the dire need of his presence, even let's say, for example, for the economic purposes, then such plea shall be considered by the court. However, in the Gurvinder Singh case of 2024, the Supreme Court took a very strong stand where it says that bail is the exception and jail is the rule under UAPA. So UAPA is an exceptional law, and if you have been charged under that, so the idea that you are basically innocent until proven guilty is entirely reversed. So in that case, even if you are an accused and not a convicted person, you will be considered as a person who is guilty unless and until you prove yourself to be innocent. However, in the recent judgment in SI Andrabi versus NIA Jammu 2025, the Supreme Court specifically held that right to personal liberty and speedy trial, both of them are fundamental right under the Article 21 of the Constitution, keep this in mind, cannot be subservient to the provisions of Section 43D Clause 5. And thus, it disapproved this earlier stand in the Gurvinder Singh. What are the suggestive measures which you people can write if a question appears on that as a way forward? First is the suggestion which was given to us by the Law Commission of India report of 2018. It says that if prima facie no case exists, if no such direct linkage has been established, then under section 43D, bail shall be given by the court. The Justice A.P. Shah Committee 2010 also said that repeal the section 43 and precisely define what constitutes a terrorist act instead of just saying that it, if anything, undermines the national or economic security. Then the NIA Review Committee 2018 basically said that there shall be robust protection of accused which shall be provided. And a research think tank, that is Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, basically suggested for introduction of pre and post facto judicial or independent oversight for the application of such UAPA provisions. So keep this in mind, keep this SI Andrabi versus the recent NIA Jammu judgment in your mind. This is the recent directive which is going to obviously, kind of influence the actions of the authorities. Attempt this question and we move forward to the next news, where India and Italy has actually elevated their bilateral ties to a special strategic partnership, thus further strengthening across the Mediterranean trade connectivity and the India-European Union trade relations. The issue which can appear in your GS2 paper under the theme of international relation, as well as under your GS3 paper, the theme of issues related to Indian economy. So what is the context of news? Elevating their bilateral ties to a special strategic partnership, India and Italy on Wednesday set a trade target of 20 billion euros by 2029. And to actually kind of supplement this trade on various important pillars of connectivity and kind of convergence, such as, for example, the defense industrial roadmap, your pact on critical minerals, countering the money laundering and terror financing which we were discussing in the previous session. So, what is the idea behind the cooperation between India and Italy and the backdrop of an emerging Indo-Mediterranean corridor which is very important from the perspective of your prelims and mains examination? First and foremost, try to understand that currently the trade which we have with Italy, the bilateral trade which we have, that is approximately $14.25 billion. And when it comes to the European Union, India is the fourth largest trading partner of Italy itself, right? So for example, now we have signed a free trade agreement with European Union, and when it comes to the specific nation of Italy, it is our fourth largest trading partner in the European Union. Also, keep this in mind that when it comes to our larger merchandise export which we do, the merchandise export which fuels our small and middle, kind of the companies which exist, the MSMEs which exist in our country, and thus provide for large scale labor intensive employment, skilled as well as semi-skilled. So for this merchandise export, which was approximately $373 billion for the month of October 2025, 21% or almost 1/5 share of our total merchandise export is actually directed towards USA, being our largest trading partner, followed closely by UAE and Netherlands. Netherlands is another country which forms the part of European Union. However, keep very dear to you that when it comes to Italy, the share of Italy in our total trade is a meager 1.5%. And thus now the government has set up a target that we are basically going to exceed this 14 billion trade which is taking place to approximately 20 billion euro by the year of 2029. And to further, kind of increase the export of our Indian products to the economy of Italy, it is very important for us to create a kind of a very affordable logistic route to the country. And for that purpose, we are trying to exploit the Mediterranean Sea and thus creating the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC. The idea of IMEC, which was actually announced in the G20 summit of 2023, which was hosted by our country itself. Keep this in mind. So, when it comes to this idea of India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, try to understand that from your history lecture, you guys might have heard about a concept which was called as Golden Road Trade. What was this Golden Road Trade? So, you guys might have heard about a dynasty which was Kushans. What Kushans did? They ended up capturing some very important port on the west coast of India. Like for example, Bhrigu Kutch. Bhrigu Kutch is nothing but the modern day Bharuch. Or for example, Suparaka or the ports of Kalyani. And thus they started using these ports to ship their product across the Strait of Hormuz, across this Persian Gulf, and thus kind of delivering their product to this larger region which comprised of Arabia at that point of a time. So this is the time period of 1st century C. Now you people might be wondering that if our product is going to the region of Arabia, how it is increasing our trade with the Europe at that point of a time? Because of the existence of a great Roman king whose name was Octavian or Augustus. Octavian or Augustus in the year of 31 BC fought a battle. The battle was called as Battle of Actium, in which he ended up defeating the Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. So at that point of a time, this entire region of Persian Gulf, Red Sea, Strait of Hormuz, Gulf of Aden, all of that formed the part of the great Egyptian empire. Who defeated it? The great Roman king whose name was King Octavian or Augustus. And thus the entire great Roman Empire now extended its wing till the region of Persian Gulf, thus taking our Indian products to Persian Gulf and ultimately crossing this Mediterranean Sea and taking it to Europe. We are just trying to revive that golden road in the form of this India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, thus connecting the UAE, the various ports like Jebel Ali, right? Or for example, Haifa in Israel, or Pyrrhus in the region of Greece, some very important ports for your prelims examination. Keep this in mind. Don't you think with the establishment of this India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, further kind of enhancing our trade with Italy and thus kind of helping us to achieve the target which has been set by the Ministry of Commerce, that is to become a $2 trillion export economy by the year of 2030. Keep this in your mind. So, in this context, when we are actually increasing our trade ties with Italy, there is one specific fact which you shall keep in your mind, that we do not have any exclusive standalone free trade agreement with Italy. Why? Because Italy forms the part of European Union, which is a strong political and economic bloc of 27 countries, which was basically born from the ashes of the World War II. All 27 countries has been listed for you in the map here. Just very selectively ignore our former colonizers, that is United Kingdom. Why? Because Brexit or exit of European Union took place, right? Of Britain took place from European Union in the year of 2020. Keep this in mind that it doesn't also imply that all the European nations are form parts of European Union. For example, you can see a very beautiful country here, which you might have seen in the movies, that is Switzerland, right? That does not form the part of European Union. Or for example, in this region, there is country that is Norway or Iceland. Even though they form the part of the larger free economic area of European Union, but they do not form the official voting members of European Union. Or for example, the Eastern European nations like for example, Belarus or Ukraine. Here is your Russia and the whole fight is taking place between Russia and Ukraine, right? If Ukraine wants to join European Union, or if Ukraine wants to join NATO, Russia basically kind of resists that. So coming back, when the World War ended, the ghost of the World War ended in the year of 1945, the various Western European nations like for example Germany, Italy, Britain, France, they realized that their economy has been devastated. At the same point of a time, they were in the dire need of create a kind of a bloc to also provide them political stability, specifically to kind of curtail the spread of the wings of Iron Curtain or the spread of the socialist ideas which was being spread under the Warsaw Pact of 1955 by Russia. And thus that led to the creation of Eurozone by these European nations, like for example under specifically the aegis and the aid of USA. So the Treaty of Paris 1951 was signed, where countries like for example Italy, France, Britain, Germany, they actually joined and created a kind of a European coal and steel community for tariff-less movement of coal and steel, which was very important for the industrialization of the Western European nation. Then under the Treaty of Rome 1957, a kind of a single European economic community was created, which ultimately transformed into a single currency, single labor and single market bloc, that is now European Union, which was formally established under the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. When I say single currency, again keep this in mind, it also does not automatically implies that each and every European nation uses euro as their official currency. There are several nations which does not, like for example Denmark or Romania or Poland or Sweden. So keep this in mind that these countries do not use euro as their official currency. For example, the official currency of Romania is leu, right? Also, this European Union, if we take it, European Union as one single entity, it basically forms the largest trading partner for our country. Keep this in mind. And thus, it also has a very great economic importance. It has a great, large population of 450 million plus population, and the population which actually lies in the developed nation. Thus, they also have a higher propensity to consume, which is also reflected from their $19 trillion GDP. Thus, it can actually act as a very lucrative market for the Indian products, which we are making under Make in India. From prelims perspective, keep this in mind that they have their headquarters at Brazil, Belgium. So, now let's try to assess how significant is India-European Union trade. Keep this in mind that in the last 5 years, from 2021 to 26, India has signed 8 free trade agreements, right? Free trade agreements with almost 8 countries. Okay? The entire free trade agreement which we have with these other 7 countries, that basically forms the part of 16% of our total trade. However, 12% of our total trade actually comes from the one single free trade agreement which we have signed with European Union, and thus European Union is India's largest trading partner, with our merchandise trade actually increasing to $136 billion, registering a 36% increase in the last 5 years. Also, European Union is India's second largest destination for export, following USA. Just look at the various items which we export to European Union: mineral fuels, mineral oil, electrical machinery, organic chemicals, nuclear reactors, mechanical appliances, iron and steel, pharmaceutical products. Keep these products in your mind. It will be very easy for you to understand the issue related to carbon border adjustment mechanism. Just look at the huge investment which the various European Union investors do to our country, the foreign direct investment, the foreign institutional investors. The EU share in foreign investment stock is approximately 108 billion euro. There are more than 6,000 European companies which actually sell their products to our economy, right? Very famous of them, like for example, Nestle is there, Volkswagen is there, your BMW is there. But the moment we actually start looking from the perspective of the European Union, the entire coin of the trade actually flips down. Because when we look at the European Union's total trade block, trade entire basket, almost 17% of their total trade actually comes from USA. 14% actually comes from our dear neighbor China. But India's share in European Union's total trade is a meager 2.2%, thus making us the 9th largest trading partner of European Union, right? Why does that happen? Why we are unable to, kind of extensively increase the number of our export to European Union? The first issue is that the kind of the free trade agreement which we have ended up signing with European Union, it actually ends up contradicting the entire idea of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. So before free trade agreement, let's refer to a data which was provided to us by the India Trade Statistic, according to which India barely import cars, the cars which are made in the European Union nation, to protect our own indigenous car manufacturing industry. The car manufacturing industry which kind of employs or provide huge employment to various engineers, laborers, semi-skilled workers, technicians, etc. Just look here, India imported $703 million worth of car in 23-24. This means that such import from European Union actually accounted for 0.1% of total import that year. So we import basically a very rare fraction of our cars from European Union. But various such European nations, right, they are actually large scale car manufacturers, BMW, Volkswagen, etc. And they are actually, they were actually forcing us under the free trade agreement also to, kind of start buying the cars from them at a much cheaper price. So currently, to kind of safeguard our indigenous car manufacturing industry, what our government does, it used to basically impose 110% tariff on the cost of the production of such car. So for example, let's say if there is a car which was being produced there at 24 lakh rupees, by the time it was imported and arrived in our country, it used to be approximately almost more than double the cost of the manufacturing cost, right, of the MRP in the European Union. So we were basically imposing a large scale import duty. However, now under FTA it is going to be reduced to a meager 10%. Because the kind of the argument which was being given by the European envoys at that point of a time was that such luxury and premium vehicle anyway makes 4 to 5% of the total passenger car sales, right? Thus, anyway there is a rich section of our country. They can actually afford such luxurious car. Let them import it. Just look at the reduction in the price which will now take place under FTA. So don't you think, see, try to understand this, as our Indian economy is growing, our middle class section is also basically, kind of swelling up. So now the propensity to consume of the people is also increasing. So if, let's say, for example, earlier the people were, trying to buy these SUVs at a cheaper cost, they can afford these prices now, 30 lakhs, 13 lakhs, let's say 47 lakhs or 52 lakhs. So people will actually try. Also, there exists a huge, kind of a EMI system which exists now. Huge kind of loan and the borrowing has become very easy. So people will actually start buying such cars more. Don't you think that will actually act as detrimental to the idea of Make in India? First thing. Second thing, now to do the same import, considering that there is a huge currency depreciation which has taken place in the context of the recent geopolitical events, now to purchase the same car, we will be actually be required to, kind of pay more in dollar, pay more in euro. Thus, don't you think further flying of forex reserves will take place, leading to the balance of payment crisis for our country? Another important issue. Second is that when it comes to, let's say, for example, our Indian product. So what happened, let's say, there is a cotton textile manufacturer in our country who is basically, kind of making some various fine fabric. So is being done by the countries or the manufacturers of the region of Vietnam and Bangladesh. But when they sell their product to European Union basically consider these nations as a least developed nation, and thus basically, let's say put a tariff of 10% on their product. But when the same is being done by an Indian trader, the European Union used to end up, kind of charging 20 to 30% on the tariff. Thus, highly competitive, and such subsidized EU products, they can actually undercut the Indian farmer earnings also. The European Union was also pushing for sensitive agriculture sector, like for example, the poultry and the dairy product. And if such product which is being mass produced by a particular nation or a region, if that starts infiltrating our Indian economy, it can actually, lead to further loss of wages, loss of earning for our farmers. The farming sector, which employs 46% of the total workforce of our country. These were the same apprehensions which we had with the regional comprehensive economic plan and partnership, and thus we did not sign that with the various Southeast Asian nations. So the ghost of RCP is also revived under this new FTA which we have signed with European Union. Then there further lies the horrors of carbon border adjustment mechanism. Just try to understand this. So we have read about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, in which what simply happens. Let's say there is a European company and the name of that company is TO. Let's say TO as a company used to produce steel, right? TO as a company basically deals with ship manufacturing, and for that it requires steel. Now to actually, kind of produce this steel, they were generating a large scale carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emission was taking place. But what European nation has done, they have taken a Fit for 55 pledge, where they say that they are going to basically cut down their greenhouse gas emission by 55% by the year of 2030. That too up to the level of 1990 itself, right? So 55% reduction will be done, take place in the next 4 years. And thus if there is a company who is, producing this steel and thus emitting large scale greenhouse gas emission, they are required to pay a hefty price for that, penalty for that. So what this company TO started doing, they basically started purchasing this steel from an Indian manufacturer, let's say Tata, and thus, kind of circumventing this entire tax or penalty which they were required to pay to the European Union. European Union is now saying that okay, if you are importing such carbon intensive products from other country, then you are required to buy the carbon certificate. So what these companies will start doing? These companies will basically start passing this burden of taxation of this certificate on what? On Indian companies. Just look at the sectors which are covered under CBM: steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizer, electricity, hydrogen. What will be the impact on Indian industries? 22% of India's total merchandise export is directed towards European Union itself. 25% of the total export products to European Union actually fall under this taxation bracket. Thus, in the year of fiscal year 2025 itself, there was 24% decline in steel and aluminium export which was registered. So even to produce such 1 ton of steel, which we are producing indigenously and we were basically exporting to European Union, it actually releases 2.4 ton of carbon dioxide. And thus, if we start paying the equivalent amount of penalty for that or start buying these carbon tax certificates, then that the marginal loss of profit registered by the Indian traders will be 16 to 22%. So don't you think that this entire export which we are doing and that was generating a large scale employment and income for our own Indian laborers, that is going to get impacted? The next is the various such non-tariff barriers which do not form the part of free trade agreement that is being imposed by European Union, where they kind of impose various phytosanitary measures on Indian products, that they are not up to the level of the product which is being produced in the European Union. So for example, various curtains of the rice basmati which was exported from our country, that was rejected by European Union and sent back to our country. Thus, European Union seeks what? TRIPS plus provision, higher compliance cost for India's pharma companies as well, right? Just look at the same point of time, the large scale trade which European Union is having with China. And thus China is actually, kind of consuming or trying to take over the European Union's market. So what can be the way forward as suggested by Shashi Tharoor in an article which he wrote for Indian Express? The first thing which he said was that let's try to indulge in the sunrise sector. Let's try to create those products which are not only of the immediate need of European Union, but for the future needs of European Union, like for example, semiconductor chips. So let's start creating semiconductor chips under National Semiconductor Mission, and for that purpose, kind of enhance such trade, technology-based trade. There was also a creation of Trade and Technology Council, which took place in 2022. And thus, let's try to, create as a lucrative alternative market for against China. So there are various European nations which are actually trying to curtail down their over-reliance or dependence which has developed over the years on China. And thus they are following a strategy called as China Plus One strategy. So let's try to supplement this China Plus One strategy with Make in India. Then the Trump is also, kind of waging a tariff war. It is also trying to pressurize the European Union. So in that case, it's very obvious that the various imports from USA's products to European Union is also going to slow down. That is also going to act as a one lucrative market for us. But our products will only gain traction in the European Union market if they are of good quality and they are slightly affordable. And thus, any product which we are creating in our country shall have a zero defect and zero effect policy. Then there is a collaboration in the field of Industry 4.0 and mineral supply which is also required. And ultimately to kind of, exploit as much as we can this India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Remember the ports like JNPT at Mumbai, Jebel Ali and UAE, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, Harad in Saudi Arabia, Al Haditha is also in Saudi Arabia, Haifa is in Israel, Piraeus is in Greece. Remember these suggestions when you are attempting this particular question, and we move forward to the next news, where in the context of the raising heat waves and the various notification which is being released by the Indian Meteorological Department, where the temperature is actually, kind of reaching up to the degrees of 45 degrees Celsius, and many of us, many lucky few of us who can afford such air-conditioned environment and are sitting comfortably in our home, don't you think that nowadays you people start questioning that shall we even switch off the air condition for once? And when we are actually, kind of taking that comfort in the privilege which we have got thanks to our parents, don't you think that it is also basically contributing to the rising power demand? So India's electricity demand has actually surged earlier than expected this year, with peak demand touching an all-time high of 256 gigawatts on April 2025. Nearly one-third or 33% of this peak demand was actually met through renewable energy sources. So you guys might be coming across various such data that how our total installed capacity, more than 50% of that is now actually coming from renewable energy. But keep this in mind that there is a difference between installed capacity and production capacity. So if it comes to the meeting this peak demand or the total demand which we are actually having, that demands 33% requirement is actually only being met by the renewable energy resources. While the national grid help without any shortage during the solar hour, the non-solar hours actually saw a deficit of 2% or approximately 4,243 megawatts on the very same day. Just look here, India's peak power demand over the past 5 years and the shortage. By the year of 23-24, as per the Central Electricity Authority, there was a deficit of 4 to 5%. Let's assume that this 4 to 5% deficit was caused in some metropolitan or mega city, where there was basically the power disruption which took place for hours. Just imagine the economic loss which we would have registered. Just imagine the kind of the failure of some critical infrastructure which could have taken place. So keep this in mind that such consistent power supply is also detrimental and directly linked to the nation's growth as well. So now let's refer to the Indian Energy Exchange data for the last 5 years, which was actually quoted in the today's article. First and foremost, it defines what constitutes peak demand. It is basically the highest point of electrical power which is consumed on the grid, typically at a 15-minute interval. So basically this supply which was provided by the various power distribution companies, they do this or manage this supply through two means. First is contractual supply, where such power distribution companies, they actually end up signing a long-term power purchasing agreement with various power generators. So they have already, kind of taken up a large scale power from these power generators and they have stored them in various storage infrastructure. So almost 85 to 90% of the power demand of the entire country is actually met through these long-term power purchasing agreement which was taken between the power generators and the distribution companies. Second is in the event of real-time mismatches which can take place, they actually kind of purchase these power on various power exchange platforms which basically ultimately meets 10 to 15% of the demand. So in the last 5 years, the power demand has risen by 37%. It was approximately 180 gigawatt back in 2020 and now it is approximately 256 gigawatts. However, keep this in mind that the article also tells us that the India's generation capacity has also increased tremendously by 76%, from just being 303 gigawatt to now 532 gigawatt. Out of this 532 gigawatt, almost more than 50% of the installed capacity is actually coming from the renewable energy. But there lies issue even to further scale or enhance this power generation as well as power distribution, and the issues for faster adoption and implementation of renewable energy. Let's try to discuss them one by one. First is that yes, the transmission lines has been extended by the government by 47% and transformation capacity has also increased by 15%. However, the corresponding expansion in the distribution infrastructure by connecting it to various metropolitan cities, mega cities, urban local bodies, rural areas, that has not happened. So as per the Central Electricity Authority itself, in the last year, there was approximately 13 lakh distribution transformer failure which was registered. So the people who are coming from, let's say, the tier 2 cities or let's say, for example, the rural areas, for you people, it might be very common to hear this, that a transformer ud gaya, right? The distribution channel has basically failed to perform. Now there is a power shortage that is taking place for hours and hours. Why? Because of the aging equipments, inadequate maintenance, that actually ends up compromising the last mile delivery. Then the states, right, they are also actually facing a fiscal issue where either they shall invest in the purchase of this costly short-term power, right, to actually meet this increasing power demand which is taking place, or they shall actually invest in the large investment which will take place, capital investment in the distribution network upgrades, but that will not immediately meet the kind of the shortage which is taking place. So they are also in the dilemma in which particular sector to invest. Then when it comes to renewable energy, it is very easy to actually say that, we shall actually install more solar panels, we shall actually extract more energy from the wind, or let's say for example from the hydropower. But keep this in mind that there is also a cost comparison which you have to keep in your mind. So let's say for example, this is basically the rupees per kilowatt hour. What we are taking, the generation plus storage which will be required to create solar energy, and for a coal based power supply. Just look at the cheap cost of it. So if we keep on investing in solar energy and renewable energy consistently and create a large scale capital infrastructure, only by the year of 2030 their cost of generation and storage is actually going to come at par. At today's time, for these power distribution companies who are facing thousands and crores of losses, it is much easier for them to generate power through these kind of fossil fuels as well as to store them. However, the government is actually taking a lot of initiative to actually boost renewable energy in our country. For example, a particular initiative which also appeared in your prelims examination last year, that was Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, an initiative of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. To do what? To install rooftop solar panels on approximately 1 crore household. And to install these solar rooftop panels, the government of India is going to provide 40% subsidy cost. And that eventually the idea is that it will end up saving 75,000 crore rupees annually in the electricity cost for these households. Then there is a green hydrogen mission, another initiative of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, to produce what? 5 million metric ton of green hydrogen by the year of 2030. That will end up adding 125 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity. Remember, very recently India's first green hydrogen plant has been launched in Jorhat, Assam. Then the government is also creating various green energy corridors for inter and intra-state transmission system. 20 gigawatt of power projects in various renewable energy rich states like for example Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat has been actually launched by the government. Remember some very specific data specifically for the prelims perspective. The current installed renewable energy capacity is 254 plus gigawatt. Just look at the share of major sources in total installed capacity. The largest is solar, followed closely by wind, then hydropower, and then nuclear energy. Almost 20.2% of India's total electricity generation actually comes from renewable energy, as we have also established through the today's data. India ranks 4th when it comes to the total renewable energy installed capacity, 4th in wind power capacity, and 3rd in the world in the term of solar power capacity. Keep this in your mind. It can basically appear as 3 statements in your prelims examination, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to learn about a forgotten hero of the revolt of 1857. What is the context of the news? So on Wednesday, the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, that is Rahul Gandhi, he basically ended up unveiling a statue of Veer Pasi, a forgotten hero who had actually fought against the Britishers during the revolt of 1857 from the region of Rai Bareli. Rahul Gandhi also addressed a Bahujan Swabhiman Sabha in Veer Pasi's memory the very same day. So try to understand this, that at that point of a time, the region of Rai Bareli was actually known as Shankarpur estate. And there was a feudal lord of this Shankarpur estate whose name was Rana Beni Madhav Baksh Singh, right? So basically, the original ruler was Raja Narayan Singh. The information is not given in your Indian Express also. So the original ruler was Raja Narayan Singh, and his son, and to be the next king, was Rana Beni Madhav Baksh Singh, right? Who was, again, information not given in your explained section, and that is he was the grandson of Raja Ranjit Singh, who basically established the first Sikh empire and ruled from the year of 1799 to his ultimate death of 1839. Okay? So this person, Veer Pasi, right? Pasi basically is a kind of a committee, a depressed class committee, right, community which exists in the region of Uttar Pradesh. So Veer Pasi was basically born on November 11, 1835 into this impoverished Dalit family. So in the region of, let's say for example, Rai Bareli at that point of a time, also known as Shankarpur estate, any such person who basically used to go and live with his sister's family. The sister who has got married to a different family now used to live with them. They were used to be called as Veerna. The Veerna which ultimately gave to the epithet or his first name that became Veer Pasi, right? So what happened that during the revolt of 1857, this young prince, Rana Beni Madhav Bakshing, was actually kind of arrested by the Britishers, right? Because he was basically, kind of raising the revolt against the Britishers, against the various economic exploitation which was done by the Britishers at that point of a time, under the permanent settlement system of 1793. So the same person, Madhav Bakshing, had actually recruited Veer Pasi earlier, right? There was a very difficult test which Veer Pasi had to go through. So basically he was required to drink 1 kg of ghee, right? 1 kg of ghee, and then to withstand 2 strong punches which was given by Madhav Bakshing. And even after that, Veer Pasi stood up. So Madhav Bakshing was impressed and recruited him into his service. So when Veer Pasi realized that how this particular person, Madhav Bakshing, right, of Rai Bareli, has been arrested by the Britishers in the context of the revolt of 1857, he raised the banner of revolt and rescued the Singh from the prison, and thus also ultimately aligned with Nana Sahib, right, who was fighting from the region of Kanpur, and Rani Lakshmi Bai, who was basically fighting from the region of Jhansi. Thus the Britishers actually ended up keeping a reward of 50,000 rupees on Veer Pasi, right, to capture him, and ultimately he basically died while fighting the Britishers in the battlefield, and thus sacrificed his life to the motherland. Keep this in mind. Also, what UPSC can do, it can basically give you such match the following section. So for example, from the region of Delhi, the banner of revolt was led by the last Mughal ruler, that was Bahadur Shah Jafar. But actually Bahadur Shah Jafar was, chosen by the Sipahis as the leader, right? So on 10th of May 1857, the Meerut regiment basically revolted. They marched to the Delhi. On 11th of May, right, they basically reached to Delhi and told Bahadur Shah Jafar that you are our leader. ठीक है, आपकी selection हो गई है, आपको पता नहीं है. Then from the region of Kanpur, it was Nana Sahib. From Lucknow, it was the wife of the last Nawab of Awadh, Wajid Ali Shah. The name was Begum Hazrat Mahal, and their son was Birjis Qadir. From Jhansi, it was Lakshmi Bai, and from Allahabad, it was Liaquat Ali. Keep this in mind, that the name of the people who basically suppressed this revolt in the major region has also been given for you. John Nicholson and Hudson, who suppressed the revolt in Delhi. Hugh Wheeler, who did it in Kanpur. Campbell, who did it in Lucknow. Hugh Rose, who basically gave the rose to Lakshmi Bai and suppressed her revolt. And Colonel Neil, who basically suppressed the revolt in Allahabad. From Mandla, it was Ravani Avanti Bai. Faizabad, it was Ahmadullah Shah. Bakht Khan from Bareilly, who eventually joined from Delhi, and Kuwar Singh from Bihar, and Shah Mal from the region of Baraut and UP. The 3 other prominent personalities which can be asked by UPSC. Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah, also called as Danka Shah, right, who basically, became the leader of revolt. Earlier, he was serving in the 22nd Native Infantry of Faizabad. He majorly fought against the Britishers in the Battle of Chinhat and ended up defeating Henry Lawrence. Or if UPSC asks you, right, let's apply a reverse mechanism. UPSC can ask you that which of the following prominent personality of revolt of 1857 ended up establishing an alliance of 84 Des or 84 village and transformed the captured bungalow of the European officials into the Hall of Justice. That was Shah Mal from Baraut. You guys might be very well aware about the Kuwar Singh, the erstwhile ruler of Jagdishpur state, who occupied the district headquarters of Ara and captured the region of Azamgarh. So just remember these prominent personalities and their contribution in the revolt of 1857, also termed as the first war of national independence by V.D. Savarkar, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn about India's 3-stage nuclear program and why it is in the news. So the context of the news is that it is heartening to see the indigenously developed pressurized heavy water reactors getting into the mainstream of India's energy push towards a net zero compliant Viksit Bharat. So under the Panchamri target, we have set up a target for ourselves that we are going to become the net zero country. Just comment down in the comment box by which year. Is it 2050? Is it 2070? The 100 gigawatt nuclear energy mission launched by the government is to be realized by 2047 under the Shanti Act. So a quicker shift to thorium that India has in abundance remains critical to India's energy independence. The large reactor capacity that can produce uranium-233 U233 from thorium at a scale while also producing electricity is a prerequisite for this. So what is this uranium-238, plutonium-239, uranium-233, which UPSC also keeps on asking about? Let's try to understand that first. So there exists two kinds of nuclear fuel. One is fissile nuclear fuel and one is fertile nuclear fuel. As the name itself suggests, fissile nuclear fuel is basically a fissile isotope that can be directly used as a fuel and thus produce a large scale energy. Like for example, uranium-233, uranium-235 or plutonium-239. So the moment we use them, they basically act as a fuel. They go through a large scale nuclear fission reaction, right? Releasing a large amount of neutrons and protons and thus basically, kind of creating a large scale energy production. Then comes your fertile nuclear fuel. As they are fertile and not fissile, they need to be first converted into fissile fuel. Like for example, uranium-238 and thorium-232. Just look here, there is a whole table which has been provided to you, which basically tell you about the large scale uranium reserves which we have in our country. Like for example, Jaugoda, Torma D and Bagzata in Jharkhand, or if UPSC asks you very recently, Pedagattu or Rohil or Damsiat, they were in the news. What are they? They are basically the very rich uranium sites which we have in our country. Pedagattu, Domsiat in Meghalaya, Lambapur in Telangana, Tumalpalle in the region of Andhra Pradesh. But in comparison to uranium, we have large scale deposit of thorium in our country. So why thorium is so important? How we can use it? But thorium is a fertile fuel, right? It's a fertile nuclear fuel. It's not fissile. So how we will use it? Let's try to understand that through the three-stage nuclear program which we have in our country. The first is the pressurized heavy water reactor. Almost majority of the nuclear reactors which exist in our country, 22 of them, they actually work upon this pressurized heavy water reactor. Where what we do, we basically use the natural uranium as the fuel, right? That is basically 7 kg of uranium-235. Right, which is basically fissile in the nature, and with that we basically mix 993 kg of uranium-238 which is fertile in the nature. So the moment where we are using this fissile uranium-235, it basically goes through the chain reaction, starts releasing neutron. These neutrons, they basically starts colliding with this uranium-238 and thus ultimately converting them into a fissile material, thus creating a kind of a nuclear fission reaction. So this uranium-238, they basically absorbs neutron and ultimately transforms into what? Into plutonium-239, which is basically nothing but a spent fuel. Plutonium-239, it's a spent fuel. The same spent fuel can now act as a fissile material for the fast breeder reactor, that is the second stage. So here we are again using the uranium-238 which is fertile and plutonium-239 which is fissile. Plutonium-239 which has been actually produced as a spent fuel in the first reaction. So here we'll create a blanket of uranium-238 over the fissile fuel core. Here the fertile U-238 will end up absorbing neutron and convert into plutonium-239 and thus create a self-sustaining chain reaction. Remember, here we actually use heavy water as both moderator and coolant. Here we use liquid sodium. Then in the advanced heavy water reactor, we basically use thorium-232 to actually produce uranium-233. Uranium-233, which is again a fissile material, which undergoes nuclear fission to create self-sustaining chain reaction. And here in the third stage, we basically use light water. Keep this in mind. First is heavy water, the third is light water. When it comes to thorium reserves in India, what is thorium? Thorium is basically found as a placer deposit along the stream, river, beaches, etc., which is basically extracted from the monazite ore, right? Which basically consists of rare earth phosphate mineral. Is it found in the entire coastal belt of our country? No. In Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. Naturally in the coastal districts like Tirunelveli, Tuticorin, Kanyakumari. Keep this in mind that Indian Rare Earth Limited under the Department of Atomic Energy is the only authority which has been sanctioned to mine and produce monazite in our country. All the important nuclear power plant has been listed here for you. Your Naroda in UP, your Kakrapar in the region of Gujarat, Tarapur in Maharashtra, Kaiga in Karnataka, right? Your Kandan Kulam in the region of Tamil Nadu. Keep them. A match the following question can come from here also. So keep these facts in your mind for prelims. We move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn some very interesting facts about the Ramsar sites and the wetlands in our country. What is the context of the news? So the National Center for Sustainable Coastal Management has actually completed the documentation and the ground truthing of Maharashtra's more than 23,000 wetlands, thus paving the way to formally notify and bring the water bodies under the legal protection under the Wetland Conservation and Management Rules. So what are Ramsar sites? Ramsar sites are basically the wetland which has been designated as one of the international importance under the Ramsar Convention, which was signed in the year of 1971. On which day? On 2nd of February, and thus on that day we celebrate the World Wetland Day. The theme for 2025 was protecting wetland for our common future. When it comes to, let's say, the first Ramsar site which was ever designated, that was Kabar Peninsula in the region of Australia. In 1971, the convention eventually came into the force, with UNESCO becoming one of the depository, and ultimately the two wetlands from our country was recognized as Ramsar site for the first time in the year of 1981, that being the Chilika Lake and the Kioladio National Park. ठीक है, यहाँ तक clear? So a very important fact sheet for prelims 2026. How many sites India have right now? 99 sites, and thus we have kind of long surpassed China, which has only 82 sites. Okay, again, now there exist 99 sites. It's very obvious that UPSC cannot expect from all of you to remember 99 sites. So just remember the salient sites now. Which is the largest Ramsar site in India? Sundarban wetland. Which is the largest Ramsar site in the world then? That is your Nagiri Nadombe wetland complex in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Which is the smallest Ramsar site in India? That is Renuka Lake in Himachal Pradesh, which you guys can see here. So this is your Himachal Pradesh, here is your Renuka wetland. Keep this in mind. Which state has the most Ramsar site? That is Tamil Nadu, with almost 20 sites. Even recently there were two sites which has been listed, Thirthangal and your Sakkarkottai. That has 20, followed closely by UP which has 12 sites. Very recently, remember, if UPSC will give you Patna Bird Sanctuary, in the front of that they will list very innovatively Bihar. It will be like, yes, Patna Bird Sanctuary is in Bihar only, but no. Patna Bird Sanctuary, which is been designated as a Ramsar wetland, is in the state of UP. Keep this in mind. In Bihar, there is your Udaipur Jheel. So Udaipur Jheel is not in Rajasthan. Keep these interesting things in your mind, right? There is your Goga Bill Lake, that is also in your region of Bihar only. Gokul Jalashay as well. Then there is your Udhwa Lake in the region of West Bengal. Udhwa Lake in the region of Jharkhand. Keep this in mind. Okay. Also, the country with the largest number of Ramsar sites, as you guys can see here, that is UK. Mexico follows closely as second, and India now has 99 Ramsar sites. Also, one year UPSC asked you, if rainforest and tropical forest are called as the lungs of the earth, then surely wetlands will function as kidney. Why? So there are 4 specific functions, right, which has been listed. Which specific function can actually make wetland as the kidney of the entire earth? So if you remember the function which is actually performed by our kidneys, then you guys can very easily guess the answer. The hint has been provided to you. We move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn about a military exercise which was in the news. What is the military exercise? So a 13-nation military exercise began where? At Umroi military station, which is where? At Meghalaya. Where, apart from the host, so India is hosting it, there were soldiers from 12 friendly nations which is participating in this exercise called as Pragati 2026. The nations being Bhutan, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Maldives, Myanmar, Nepal, Philippines, Seychelles, Sri Lanka and Vietnam. Let me check your memory quickly here. In this lecture itself, we learned about the Golden Triangle. Just look at these 12 nations and try to recall. Does all 3 members of Golden Triangle also forms the part of the member nations who are participating in Pragati 2026 or not? Just pause the video and comment yes or no right here. Okay, just try to check yourself. The exercise actually seeks to provide a common platform for participating the armies to engage in professional exchange and build closer military to military ties. All the important military, army and Air Force exercise which has been in the news has been covered for you from the perspective of prelims. The Yudh Abhyas which we do with USA. So the Yudh Abhyas and Vraj Prahar, both is committed with USA. With France we actually commit Shakti. With UK, we basically do Ajay Warrior. Which country we are sharing our hand in hand with our dear neighbor, that is China. So if it is only Shakti, that is France. But if it is Mitra Shakti, then it is going to be Sri Lanka. The Surya Kiran from the area where the sun actually, kinds of rises up, that is Nepal. The Malabar is a navy exercise in which the entire Quad countries participate. The Varun is a navy exercise with France. The Konkan is a navy exercise with UK, and the COPE India is an air force exercise where USA also participates and Japan acts as an observer. Just keep all of these important exercises from the prelims perspective. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.